Ham Radio 2.0 Technician Class Breakdown. This is part 3. This is the 3rd episode. I did a live stream with Chris Cotter, KD5HIY, from the Hearst Amateur Radio Club. W5HRC.org is their website. It was a live stream for 3 different days, and it was like 2 to 3 hours per day. So I took all those, took the meat out of those live streams, and broke them down into pieces for you. This is part 3 from the 2nd day. And it's all about going solo, repeaters, and emergency communications, getting your technician license. Check the link in the description below where you can get the book that follows along with this course. Good luck.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm happy to be back tonight for round 2. Again, I want to thank all the moderators and everybody that's helping out in the chats. Also want to thank Mike and 5YM for actually writing this material. He did a very good job, and we've used it many times. So we'll go ahead and get started. I hope that y'all have done probably at least one practice test just to see what it's like, get your feet wet. You may have, if you did, you probably got about 30% right, maybe 40% right, which is pretty much right on par. So again, this is brought to you by the Hearst Amateur Radio Club. This is session 2. If you missed the first one, you want to watch it first because this does build on that. So we're going to start by talking about transmitters and receivers. Basically, a transceiver, when you combine a transmitter and a receiver into the same box, you get a transceiver, because it does both parts. The one on the left is a mobile. It's a 10-meter mobile, looks like, and then the other one is a handheld. Both of them do the same thing as far as function. Some of the older transmitters will have some fine-tuning knobs on it. So one of the knobs, the large knob on this screen, on this radio, is going to be your tuning knob, your main tuning knob. And then some radios will have another knob called RIT, R-I-T, receiver incremental tuning. It's like a fine tuning knob is what that is. So you will use the large knob to get on the frequency. And as radios age, they will kind of start to drift off of the actual frequency that is shown on your screen or on your panel. And so that's what the RIT button or the RIT knob will do, is it will just kind of help you fine tune, and that way you're lined up exactly with what the person you're trying to talk to, the same frequency that they're on. Just about every radio, if not all, have some sort of a squelch control on them. The squelch control is a transceiver. On a transceiver is designed to basically quiet the noise when there's no signal being received. Back in my early days when I was little, and my first handheld radio was just one of those little toy handhelds that when you turned it on, it just constantly had that static noise. Didn't have a squelch built in. That's what the squelch is here for. It's for, you could turn that knob up to basically silence the radio. That way it's not always making noise, and you're not always hearing some sort of static. On some radios, the squelch is set using a knob like this one. Some of the newer ones that have more advanced functions, they may not have had a place to put another knob, so it will be a menu function. But it should still have it regardless, somewhere, whether it's a physical button or a menu option. This is known as carrier squelch. And like I said, the sole purpose of this is basically just to quiet the radio. So this is a pretty common radio. Linco is one maker out there. When you want to actually select a frequency that you want, there's 2 modes that you can operate in. You can either operate in memory mode, which we talked about yesterday, or you can operate in, basically it's manual dial mode. It's called VFO, which is a variable frequency oscillator. Every radio is going to have it. Somewhere in there, you can use, in this case, if you want to enter in a frequency, you can use the keypad just like you would a telephone. It's got a DTMF touchpad on the microphone itself, or you can use the VFO knob. Both of them will do the same thing. One is quicker than the other, but they will do the same thing. So VFO is basically manual mode, no memory. It allows you to manually dial in the frequency that you want to go to. So yesterday you heard me say something about Q signals, like QSO or QSY, QRM. Q signals are they're shorthand abbreviations used to speed up communications. They were developed for Morse code. But even though they were developed for Morse code to shorten things, we still use them in voice all the time. It's not uncommon to hear somebody say, okay, I'm going to QSY to another frequency, or I'm at the QTH, which is house. I'm getting some QRM, which is man-made interference. So there's a long list. You don't have to know every one of them. There are a couple of them that you will need to know, just so you're familiar with them, because you will hear them on the radio. Both of these are, there's a couple of them. So QRM is man-made interference, such as another station operating either knowingly or unknowingly too close to you, and they're kind of bleeding in on your signal. Could be an accident, hopefully not on purpose. But then there's also QRN, which is nature sounds, lightning or storms or anything like that can cause some sort of interference. So QRM as well as QRN are a couple more that you'll want to store in the back of your mind. So there are different ways to call out on the radio. The most common is calling CQ. This is generally done on HF, where you do sideband and AM operations. So CQ means basically calling any station, calling anybody. I want to talk to somebody. CQ, CQ, CQ. It's an invitation for any operator listening on that frequency to respond. Anybody hear me? You can call back to me and I'll respond. So when you answer a CQ, you first say the other station's call sign, the actual person who was calling CQ, followed by your call sign. That way they hear somebody calling them and then identifying who it is that's actually being called. So CQ is very, very common. There are some times that we don't use CQ. We don't use CQ on a repeater. I have heard it. Nobody's going to get on to you if you call CQ on a repeater. But the first thing you want to do when you want to call CQ, if you want to talk to somebody and you're on, say, a 2 meter or simplex, or you're on 6 meters, you want to do some sort of a distant contact, you want to listen first. Always listen. So listen for anyone else using that frequency. I would give it at least 10 seconds, maybe more. Then ask if the frequency's in use. If you want to be very, very sure, ask if the frequency's in use. Make sure that you're on the proper band. That should be one of your first steps there. So as with all things human, we like to make a contest. We like to make a contest out of or a sport out of anything. So same thing in ham radio. We like to contest. It's a very popular ham activity, basically in making contacts with as many stations as possible during a time period. So it's usually on HF bands. You might find it on 6 meters. You might find it on a VHF, but it's generally on HF, and it's almost always some sort of a contest going on. The goal is to work as many different countries or as many different states or grid or whatever the terms are. You want to try and make as many contacts as you possibly can by exchanging the minimum information required. Call sign, location, and then Q signal received and sent, or basically your your receive and your send signal strength. One of the modes that you will operate will be simplex. Basically means you are transmitting and receiving on the same frequency. In this case, they're on the 2-meter call frequency, 146.52. Both of them are on there. They transmit and they receive on the same. So simplex is basically direct communication. That's what it is. You're not using a repeater. You're not going through anything else. You're going directly from one radio to the next. A repeater is a radio transceiver that receives a signal on one frequency and then simultaneously retransmit on another frequency. Repeaters are very common. You will find here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's, I would say it wouldn't be surprised if there were hundreds. Usually at a high location, the higher the better when it comes to a repeater. They generally transmit at a high power. The sole purpose is to extend the range of a handheld and mobile radio. That way, you can talk into a repeater. They're generally very sensitive. You can talk into the repeater, and then without any effort on your part, your signal will be transmitted at a much higher power. The Hearst Club that we're putting on this right now, this presentation right now, one of our repeaters is on top of a water tower in the middle of Hearst, and its radiated power is about 125 watts. So you can transmit into it at about 5 watts or less, and then it will retransmit at about 125 or whatever the repeater owner has it set to. Generally, it's FM on UHF or VHF, or there are some newer digital technologies that may be operating also. So FM is going to be the mode of choice. That's what you're going to want to memorize. But now, kind of moving into the future, there's some digital technologies also. So the main difference between the input and output frequency is known as the offset. Every repeater will have an offset. There is a standard number. There is a standard offset frequency on 2 meters, which is what they are operating on right now. That offset is, let me go back. That offset is 600 kilohertz, and then that is the standard across the board for repeaters, 2-meter repeaters, and then on 70 centimeters, that offset is actually 5 megahertz, so it's a little bit wider gap there. So you talk into the repeater, it receives on one frequency, and then immediately begins to transmit on a different frequency. So him is talking in on the repeater input. The repeater is retransmitting that on the output of 147.100 at a much higher power. So input and then output. So when you transmit and receive on 2 different frequencies, this is called duplex. Duplexing is what this is. You don't have to duplex through a repeater. You can do that. Say if you have 2 handheld radios, you can duplex using those going basically direct. It's transmitting and receiving on 2 different frequencies. This is an aerial picture of the antenna on top of the water tower in Hearst. This is at TCC College. It's way up on top. It's about 170 feet, I think it is. So the antenna is up on top, and then there's some coax cable that goes all the way down to the shack, or the actual building that the repeater is in. And this repeater, its input is 147.7, and its output is 147.10. So you can see there's a 600 kilohertz offset there. The offset frequency, that is the difference between the input and the output frequency. And like I said, this is standard across the board in the United States. 600 kilohertz on 2 meters, and then 5 megahertz on 7 centimeters. Now, this can be either positive or negative. It just depends on the repeater. Most most modern radios from the big providers will generally automatically calculate that offset for you, so you don't have to memorize it. Some of the lesser expensive Chinese radios, you'll have to know all of that information to put it in there. So there are a few repeaters that don't use offsets that are standard. They're said to have non-standard frequency offsets. Frequency splits is another name for them. When you run into this, they're generally considered what's called non-coordinated or backyard repeaters. Somebody wanted a repeater, and so they just set it up. And you can do that, but there are some things you have to look out for that we'll discuss later. You will usually set your radio up to listen on the repeater's output frequency. And then you set your radio to transmit on a frequency equal to the offset, plus or minus from the output frequency. When you put this into your radio will automatically shift when you press the push to talk. It will automatically either shift up or down depending on what the repeater's input frequency is. It will automatically either shift up or down as by whatever the radio, if it's been programmed to automatically know that, or you've put it in there. In this example, the Hurst Racy's repeater has an output frequency of 147.1. So that's what the repeater actually transmits on. That's where you're going to listen. That's, if you have a scanner, that's the frequency you're going to put in. That's the output. The offset is a plus, is a positive. In this particular spectrum of the band, it's a positive offset. So it's going to be a 600 kilohertz higher. So 147.1 plus 0.6 is 147.7. 147.7 is the repeater input frequency. That's what your radio, when you actually key up your transmitter, it's going to shift up to 147.7 and transmit there. And then the repeater will retransmit on its output 147.1. So just some general operating guidelines. What's the first thing you should do before you use a repeater? And that's going to be listen. Listen. How can you tell if a repeater is already in use? Listen. I can tell you, count many times that I've been engaged in a conversation, and somebody will just flip over and immediately start talking and interrupt what we were having a QSO there. If you just listen, you'll hear somebody, and if you're still not sure, you can ask if the frequency's in use. So listen is going to be your best friend. Area repeater frequencies are determined by recognized regional coordinators, not the FCC. The FCC does not want, they make the rules. They don't want to have to involve themselves in coordinating repeaters. They just don't have the resources at. So they give that responsibility to regional coordinators. An example of that here in Dallas-Fort Worth is, or in quite a bit of Texas, is the Texas VHF Society. They do the surveys, they do the assignments, they keep all that information on hand in order to keep repeaters from overlapping each other. This reduces interference between repeaters, and it makes sure that we properly use the most efficient use of the available frequencies within the band plan. So this is a band plan right here. This one is one of many that are out there. ICOM puts this one out. They're a radio manufacturer. It's a voluntary list or voluntary agreement for use of the frequency spectrum. So if you look 2 meters, if you let's go down CW, it shows you exactly where the CW is generally working. Single sideband, FM, where in the band it is that has been allocated. So this goes all the way up to 1240. That actually goes all the way down to 160 meters. It's all planned out so we can use the spectrum the most efficiently. You can download a band plan from ICOM. The ARRL has a very good one that you can download for free. The W5YI, and I know probably numerous other ham organizations out there have band plans that you can download for free. Couldn't hurt to have it on your wall next to your radio, just to be sure. So because there are a limited number of input-output frequencies, we generally call these pairs. So you'll hear a repeater owner say, yeah, I got a new pair. That's the input-output frequencies. They may share the same input frequencies as another repeater somewhere else in the state. Each repeater does have a coverage area. Some footprints are larger than others, but both repeaters, because they are programmed for the same frequencies, can hear the other one. So we need a way to access only one repeater at a time. So that way, if we're right in the middle of these two, and we key a transmitter, we're not actually keying both of them at the same time. So you get your pair, your offset, and then we also program what's called a CTCSS, continuous tone coded squelch system, or PL tone if that's a Motorola trademark. So CTCSS or PL tone is what we basically plug in. The repeater can hear this tone when you start transmitting. You cannot hear it. It's at a frequency that's too low, but this tone is required in order to activate the transmitter. If the repeater hears your signal, but you don't have this subaudible tone, it will recognize that and say, not interested, go away, basically is what it will do. So repeaters having overlapping coverage areas will be set up with different CTSS tones. Otherwise, you will activate both of them at the same exact time. The repeater will only retransmit a signal that has its matching CTCSS tone, PL tone, and then it will reject all others. This is generally a good thing to have because let's just say there's a lightning storm around. If you don't have a tone set, every time the lightning will strike, your radio will activate. And so this is one of the things that prevents just general noise from activating your radio or a repeater radio. In order to use a repeater, you're going to need to know some information. When you look online for repeater information, you're going to get the output frequency, you're going to get the offset, and you're going to get the access tone. The access tone is the CTCSS or PL tone. Those are the three things that you're going to need. And then you'll have to calculate, or your radio will calculate for you, the frequency that will either shift up or down on your radio. So you're going to need to know the output, the offset, and the access tone. If you want to join an existing conversation on a repeater, just wait for a break between transmissions. Most repeaters have some sort of a courtesy tone, so when you let off a radio, it will give you a beep or some sort of noise letting you know that the conversation or the transmission is over, and you can hear that. It's, like I said, it's usually a beep or some sort of noise to where you can clearly understand what it is. Then give your call sign. Just give your call sign out there, KD5HOI. Somebody will generally acknowledge you and invite you to join in. We love to have big QSO parties on the air, and so it's not uncommon, have multiple people join and fall off during a given time. So you just give your call sign and wait to be acknowledged. Other radio services will use the word break. In amateur radio, do not use the word break unless you have an emergency. That is reserved for emergency use only, period. If you say break and you don't have an emergency, that's basically could be equivalent to like calling 911 when you don't have an emergency and hanging up. So it's considered serious business if somebody says break. So some etiquette, repeater etiquette. Speak in plain English or whatever language the repeaters generally operate in. Listen to see if the frequency is in use before you call. That way you don't just kind of barge in and interrupt a QSO going on. If in doubt, ask if the frequency is in use and then use your call. So is the frequency in use, K85HIY? That's what I would say. Don't call CQ. You can just say it's K85HIY listening. You're just giving that information out there. If it's saying, hey, I want to use the repeater, I want to talk to somebody, you don't have to call CQ on a repeater. Don't use break unless it is an emergency. To interrupt, give your call sign between the other stations. That way somebody can hear you, and then acknowledge the station interrupting and turn it over to them as soon as possible. It could be an emergency. Have you ever heard the squelch tail? Don't be trigger happy. So when you actually begin transmitting, it takes just a second for the receiver to pick up your signal or receive your signal, recognize that it is a valid signal, and then key the transmitter. So there is a little bit of a delay. If you will key your transmitter and just give it a second, that's more than enough time. Don't be trigger happy. We actually have a name for that, and it's we call it quick keying, and it's because you began talking at the instant that you pushed your push to talk button, and the first part of your conversation was cut off. Wonder if you can hit the repeater. A common practice, and it is not legal, and it drives me up the wall, is kerchunking. Give your call sign. If you're wondering if you can make it to the repeater, just give your call sign. Say K85HIY testing. Always identify. You're supposed to identify at every 10 minutes or at the end of your conversation. Run on the lowest necessary power to operate. You don't have to try and call on a very low power HT when everyone tells you it's unreadable. Increase your power if you're just not making it in. Speak clearly. Don't key and unkey your rig the instant that you start and stop speaking. It does take some time for the system to come up and down. Unfortunately, there are some jammers out there who like to get on there and cause problems on the radio. Just ignore them. If you hear some sort of information that might be able to lead to who it is, take notes. The whole reason that they jam is for the attention. To get on there and make a clown of themselves. So just ignore them. Generally, they will go away. So repeaters do come in different flavors. The traditional one is voice phone repeater. This is an FM modulated signal, just a standard FM handheld radio. I don't know if you can see that in the camera. It's just an FM radio. Then we have digital repeaters. That includes packet radio, D-Star, Fusion, which is a digital voice, DMR digital voice, D-Star is digital voice. Packet radio can be some sort of an APRS, which is a position reporting system. You can pass data through some repeaters. And then there's amateur television repeaters. This retransmits fast scan amateur television, which is basically like the television that you might have in your house, except it operates on the amateur radio bands. Some repeaters are linked in a network. Those do exist. So when you actually key up one repeater, it will key up multiple repeaters. If you're operating in that situation, when you key a repeater, you'll want to give it longer than the normal time, because it will take time to actually activate the remote repeaters that it's connected to. So we're going to take a little review here. Yesterday, I would read the question, give you about 5 seconds to come up with the answer. I'm going to do the same thing here. So, which type of modulation is the most commonly used for VHF and UHF voice repeaters? So this was going to be FM. That is the most common at this time. Digital is kind of growing, but FM is still pretty much dominant. What brief statement is transmitted in place of a CQ to indicate that you are listening on a repeater? You just say your call sign. I would get on there and I'd just say KD5HIY listening, or mobile or portable or anything like that. Just let anybody know that I'm actually out there listening and ready to talk. Which of the following describes the common meaning of the term repeater offset? It's going to be C, the difference between the repeater's transmit and receive frequencies. What is a common repeater offset on the 70 centimeter band? We did cover this just a minute ago about the 70 centimeter band. That is going to be A, plus or minus 5 megahertz. What is the purpose of the squelch control on a transceiver? It's going to be to mute the receiver output noise when there's no signal being received. That way you don't go crazy. What is the term used to describe the subaudible tone transmitted with normal voice audio to open the squelch of a receiver? It's going to be CTCSS, also known as a PL tone. Questions or anything you can ask in the chat. Happy to take those. We're actually, I thought we were at a break, but we're not quite there just yet. So one of the major things that we do in amateur radio is why one of the reasons that we exist is because of emergency communications. This can be operating as a storm spotter, or a backup communications for public service or health care, really anything that might need some sort of a backup or additional information from some sort of other source. An emergency is a situation which possesses immediate risk to health, life, or property. That is what they will define that as: immediate risk to health, life, or property. Most emergencies require urgent intervention to prevent a worsening of the situation. So emergency communications take precedence over all other communications, period. If you were to ask that to the FCC, they would not argue with you. They would say emergency has priority, always. So make an emergency distress call on amateur radio if you're on Morse code, you can say SOS. This is the International Radio Distress Call when communicating in Morse code. And then Mayday is the International Radio Distress Call when communicating by voice. So SOS or Mayday immediately will get the priority over anything else. Using SOS or Mayday indicates you are in distress. It is a distress call. So communication concerns a person's well-being sent out into or out of a disaster area are called health and welfare traffic. These messages are important, but are not emergency traffic. So that is a very common thing that you will see during like a hurricane net, and we'll talk about nets shortly. To interrupt a conversation on a repeater for an emergency or distress call, just wait for a pause between the transmissions. If you try to break in while somebody's talking, you won't be heard. The person who was actually doing the talking will no longer be heard. So you have to wait between transmissions before you can actually break in. You say priority, emergency, or break, or mayday, whatever it is to convey that you have an emergency. You give your call sign. So break, KD5HLY, give your call sign. And when a ham radio operator hears that, they know that everything stops and you now have the priority on the frequency. The other stations will give you immediate access to the repeater and will assist you as appropriate. Like we said earlier, do not use the word break to interrupt a conversation for any reason except to indicate an emergency. If you're in public service, that might be a difficult thing because you use the word break to interrupt, say, multiple bits of information. Here it is emergency use only. If you hear an emergency distress call on the radio, you should immediately stop your conversation. Allow the emergency caller access to the frequency, find out who they were or who they are, what's going on, what they need. Assist the emergency as appropriate. Take down the information accurately. The 911 dispatchers would find it very interesting to say, irritating to say, okay, where are we going? Well, I don't really know. Somebody just called me. So you want to make sure you take down the information as accurately as you can. Call the authorities as appropriate. Usually just call 911. You don't have to call a fire station directly or police directly. Just call 911. During an emergency, you may use any means of communication at your disposal to communicate. Any means available, any radio, any frequency, anywhere. However, if you have a cell phone available or you have a handheld available, and you're trying to get help for, say, a police officer that's down, and you have a radio available, use your radio or use your phone. Don't get on another radio unless that is the only option, because you will have to give account for it. You probably won't get in trouble if it's an emergency situation, but if you have another radio available and you use that, or you don't use that, you use a police radio, they're going to question why you didn't just use what you had and got on their frequency. So use any radio, any frequency anywhere, as long as no other means is available. Emergency communications is taken seriously, so making a false emergency call can result in, and usually will result in, revocation of your license. Making a false claim can get you a monetary fine, and they're usually very expensive, like $10,000 or more. And just like if you were to make a fake 911 call, or something like that, where basically you're saying you have an emergency and you really don't, filing a false report, you're probably going to go to jail. So same thing here. Emergency communications are taken very seriously. So don't give false reports. The FCC may declare certain frequencies as restricted to emergency communications only. This is not uncommon especially during hurricane season. So they will define special conditions and requirements. They will set aside certain frequencies for the use of like a hurricane net or some sort of emergency communications on amateur radio, where that way information can still flow back and forth, because oftentimes during hurricanes, public service systems may go down or internet may go down. That's not uncommon. So hurricane net frequencies for communications into and out of a stricken area will be set aside, and unless you are working in that for that need, you're not to stay, or you're not to operate in there. We do have different kinds of emergency operations. We have ARES, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. This is a private. This is for sort of supporting private agencies like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, National Weather Service, or something along that line. RACES is a different one. There are usually more restrictive. A RACES mode is activated by a local state or government. Each city can, at their discretion, activate a RACES net, and then it is restricted to only those who are qualified and certified as RACES members for that area. This is used for emergency management or civil defense. Oftentimes, you will get a weather radio or weather event coming through, and a city will activate, let's just say, Skywarn under RACES. So only since it was activated by a government agency, let's just say Fort Worth activates RACES, only RACES qualified, trained, and recognized people, hams, can actually operate on a RACES net. Where Aries, there are no restrictions, but you do want to observe what kind of information the net control is trying to get. So when providing communications in support of public agencies under RACES or Aries, the FCC rules do apply still. So that's not a way to get out of following the rules. So 2 organizations. One is just general private activation, and then the other is federal government or emergency management, civil defense activated. So the net control station is the middleman when it comes to a net. The net control station directs and coordinates communications of all other stations participating in the net. They're like the traffic cop. They're telling you when to go, when to stop, when to relay, when to hold, basically everything. You transmit only when they tell you to transmit. So if you call in and say that you're available, now you are waiting on them to call you back and say, okay, whatever information you have, you can now transmit. The net control station is in charge. All communications are directed by the net control station, NCS. Don't transmit unless directed or unless you have an emergency. So again, if you have an emergency, you will take priority even on a net. So if you can call and say emergency, priority, break, whatever it is to convey that you have some sort of emergency and now you have priority on the radio. Do not transmit personal information about victims. The HIPAA does still apply if there's some sort of a, let's say a tornado comes through town and you say Billy's got a broken leg and cut on his head. Well, you have just identified that person over the air for anybody who's listening. You need to use some sort of non-voice mode, such as packet or Morse code, or some other means to where you're not releasing personally identifiable information over the air for anybody to hear. That can get you in trouble. So third-party traffic. Amateur communications by or under the supervision of the control operator at an amateur station to another amateur station at the request of others. So here, Hilda and Henry are having a conversation, and he's passing information. Says, Hilda, your mother needs you to stop by her house on your way home. Perfectly fine. There is nothing at all wrong with that. Or the shelter and headquarters 1, the incident commander wants to be informed when the Red Cross truck arrives. So you're passing third-party traffic. You are the control station, and you are passing that third-party traffic. That is perfectly fine. And as you notice down there, those are going to be tactical call signs. Third-party traffic is also going to include passing what we call radiograms. So it's basically, it's kind of like the old-fashioned telegram. So you're receiving a message exactly as written or spoken or received. So it's all written down and given to a radio operator who will then relay that to whomever into the traffic network. So this is an example of sending a radiogram. Like I said, a radiogram is basically it's a form that you fill out. It's limited to 25 words. You write that information down, and you send an information from one radio operator to another, who then can relay that to another. Really, any number of relays. and then the receiving station will receive that and can call Aunt Patty and tell her that everybody's good and she was glad to hear from you. This is a radiogram right here. So this is a document where you fill out the preamble information up at the top. Generally, that will be relayed to, or you will give that information to the person who's going to be sending the information. Give just basic information: where is it going, where it started, time, date. The checkbox right there, that is the way that you can verify that your message is sent correct. So if you say, I was happy to see you today, 7 letters. I was happy to see you today. Yeah, 7 letters. Your checksum or your checkbox up there would have 7. That way, when you're done, or the radio operator is done, they can say check of 7. And if the receiving station only got 6, then they would know something was lost in transmission and to send it again. That way, it's keeps the integrity of the message. It must contain the name of the person originating the message, because it does actually go into a network of ham operators, and that network can go all across the country, all across the world, depending on what the destination is. So we'll have a quick review here. Some questions again. Which of the following is a characteristic of good emergency traffic handling? Answer is going to be A, passing messages exactly as received. Are amateur station control operators ever permitted to operate outside the frequency privileges of their license class? Answer is D. A is very tempting, but the actual answer is D. So yes, but only if in necessary situations involving the immediate safety of human life or protection of property. What is meant by the term check in reference to a formal traffic message? That's going to be the basically the word count of the message. That is going to be the number of words will be put up into that box in order to verify that if the message has 7 words, 7 words were received. When do the FCC rules not apply to the operation of an amateur station? Answer is going to be D. Never. They always apply. They will always apply. Put your questions into the chat, and we can answer some of those as we go.